about the applications of geophysics in understanding Earth. The Earth is a dynamic planet, perpetually changing both externally and internally. Its surface is constantly being altered by endogenic processes, that is, of internal origin, resulting in volcanism and tectonism, as well as by exogenic processes, that is, of external origin, such as erosion and deposition. These processes have been active throughout geological history. Volcanic explosions like the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens in the northwestern United States can transform the surrounding landscape virtually instantaneously. Earthquakes also cause sudden changes in the landscape, sometimes producing faults with displacements of several meters in seconds. Weather-related erosion of surface features occasionally occurs at dramatic rates, especially if rivers overflow or landslides are triggered. The Earth's surface is also being changed constantly by less spectacular geological processes at rates that are extremely slow in human terms. Regions that have been depressed by the loads of past ice sheets are still rebounding vertically at rates of up to several millimeters per year. Tectonic forces cause mountains to rise at similar uplift rates, while the long-term average effects of erosion on a regional scale occur at rates of centimeters per year. On a larger scale, the continents move relative to each other at speeds of up to several centimeters per year for time intervals lasting millions of years. Extremely long times are represented in geological processes. This is reflected in the derivation of a geological time scale. The Earth's interior is also in motion. The mantle appears hard and solid to seismic waves, but is believed to exhibit a softer plastic behavior over long geological time intervals, flowing or creeping at rates of several centimeters per year. Deeper inside the Earth, the liquid core probably flows at a geologically rapid rate of a few tenths of a millimeter per second. Geologists have long been aware of the Earth's dynamic condition. Several hypotheses have attempted to explain the underlying mechanisms. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, geological orthodoxy favored the hypothesis of a contracting Earth. That is paleomagnetism and continental drift. In the late 19th century, geologists discovered that rocks can carry a stable record of the geomagnetic field direction at the time of their formation. From the magnetization direction, it is possible to calculate the position of the magnetic pole at that time. This is called the virtual geomagnetic pole, or VGP for short, position, averaged over a time interval longer than a few tens of thousands of years. The mean VGP position coincides with the geographic pole, as if the axis of the mean geomagnetic dipole field were aligned with the Earth's rotation axis. This correspondence can be proved for the present geomagnetic field, and a fundamental assumption of paleomagnetism called the axial dipole hypothesis is is that it has always been valid. The hypothesis can be verified for rocks and sediments up to a few million years old, but its validity has to be assumed for the earlier geological epochs. However, the self-consistency of paleomagnetic data and their compatibility with the continental reconstructions argue that the axial pole hypothesis is also applicable to the Earth's ancient magnetic field. For a particular continent, rocks of different ages give different mean VGP positions. The appearance that the pole has shifted with time is called as apparent polar wander, that is APW. By connecting mean VGP positions of different ages for sites on the same continent, a line is obtained called the apparent polar wander path of the continent. Each continent yields a different APW path, which consequently cannot be the record of movement of the pole. Rather, each APW path represents the movement of the continent relative to the pole. By comparing APW paths, the movements of the continents relative to each other can be reconstructed. The APW path provides strong supporting evidence for continental drift. Paleomagnetism developed as a geological discipline in the 1950s and 1960s. The first results indicating large-scale continental movement were greeted with some skepticism. In 1956, S.K. Rincon demonstrated that the paleomagnetic data from Permian and Triassic rocks in the North America and Great Britain agreed better if the Atlantic Ocean were closed. That is, as in the Laurasia configuration in 1957, E. Irving showed that Mesozoic paleomagnetic data from the southern continents were more concordant with Du Toit's Gondwana land reconstruction than with the present arrangement of the continents. Since these pioneering studies, numerous paleomagnetic investigations have established APW paths for the different continents. The quality of the paleomagnetic record is good for most geological epochs since the Devonian. The record for older geological periods is less reliable for several reasons. In the early Paleozoic, the data become fewer and the APW paths become less well defined. In addition, the oldest parts of the paleomagnetic record are clouded by the increasing possibility of false directions due to the undetected secondary magnetization. This happens when thermal or tectonic events alter the original magnetization so that its direction no longer corresponds to that at the time of rock formation. Remagnetization can affect rocks of any age, but it is recognized more readily and constitutes a less serious problem in younger rocks. Problems afflicting a Precambrian paleomagnetism are even more serious than in the early Paleozoic. APW paths have been derived for the Precambrian, especially for North America, but only in a broad outline. In part, this is because it is difficult to date Precambrian rocks precisely enough to determine the fine details of an APW path. It is often not possible to establish which is the north or south pole. In addition, the range of the time encompassed by the Precambrian more than 3.5 giga-annum is about 6 times longer than the 570 million years length of the Phanerozoic, and the probability of remagnetization events is correspondingly higher. In spite of some uncertainties, early Paleozoic paleomagnetism permits reassembly of the supercontinents. Gondwana land and Laurasia and traces their movements before they collided in the Carboniferous to form Pangaea. Geological and paleomagnetic evidence concur that in the Cambrian period, Gondwana land very likely existed as a supercontinent in essentially the Deutoids configuration. It coexisted in the early Paleozoic with 3 other cratonic centers: Laurentia, North America and Greenland, Baltica, that is Northern Europe, and Siberia. Laurentia and Baltica were separated by Iapetus Ocean, which began to close in the Ordovician, that is about 450 million years ago. Paleomagnetic data indicate that Laurentia and Baltica fused together around late Silurian time to form the supercontinent Laurasia. At that time, the Siberian block remained a separate entity. The Laurentia-Baltica collision is expressed in the tectonic and between Gondwana land and Laurasia in the middle Silurian, closed about the time of the Silurian-Devonian boundary, that is about 410 million years ago. Readjustments of the position of the continental blocks in the Devonian produced the Akkadian orogeny. Laurasia separated from the Gondwana land in the late Senior orogeny. Carboniferous, that is 300 million years ago, Pangaea was almost complete except for Siberia, which was probably appended in the Permian. The general configuration of the Pangaea from the late Carboniferous to the early Jurassic is supported by paleomagnetic results from the Atlantic bordering continents. However, the paleomagnetic data suggest that the purely geometric is only appropriate for the latter part of the Pangaea's existence. The results for earlier times from the individual continents agree better for slightly different reconstructions. This suggests that some internal rearrangement of the component parts of the Pangaea may have occurred. Also, the computer-assisted geometric assembly of the Gondwana land, similar to that proposed by the Deutoid, is not the native placements of the West Gondwana land, that is South America and Africa, and East Gondwana land, that is Antarctica, Australia and India, and implied that they may have moved relative to each other. The paleomagnetic data do not contradict the alternative models, but are not precise enough to definitively between them. Magnetic results leaves little room for doubt that the continents have changed positions relative to each other throughout geological time. This lends justification to the concept of continental drift, but it does not account for the mechanism by which it has taken place. Another aspect of the paleomagnetic record, the history of magnetic field polarity rather than the APW paths has played a key role in deducing the mechanism. The explanation requires an understanding of the Earth's internal structure, the distribution of seismicity and importance of the ocean basins. Now coming to the second module, that is the Earth's structure. Early in the 20th century, it became evident from the study of seismic waves that the interior of the Earth has a radially layered structure, like that of an onion. The boundaries between the layers are marked by abrupt changes in seismic velocity or velocity gradient. Each layer is characterized by a specific set of physical properties determined by the composition, pressure and temperature in the layer. The four main layers are the crust, mantle and the outer and inner cores, and summarized briefly here. At depths of a few tens of kilometers under continents and less than 10 kilometers beneath the oceans, seismic velocities increase sharply. This seismic discontinuity, discovered in 1909 by A. Mohorovičić, represents the boundary between the crust and mantle. R.D. Oldham noted in 1906 that the travel times of seismic compressional waves that traverse the body of the Earth were greater than expected. The delay was attributed to a fluid outer core. Support for this idea came in 1914 when B. Gutenberg described a shadow zone for seismic waves at epicentral distances greater than about 105 degrees. Just as light waves cast a shadow of an opaque object, seismic waves from an earthquake cast a shadow of the core on the opposite side of the world. Compressional waves can in fact pass through the liquid core. They appear delayed in time at epicentral distances larger than 143 degrees. In 1936, I. Lehman observed the weak arrivals of compressional waves in the gap between 105 degrees and 143 degrees. They are interpreted as evidence for a solid inner core.